Hey everyone, I'm Rico Felice with Rockford Fosgate. This year we've done some really cool and innovative things with RZR-specific audio kits. So what I want to do is take you inside, take a look at what comes in these kits, and then we're going to see how they all go together. Hey everyone, I am here with Lee Teeples from RTTI, and we are going to walk you through the installation process for our RZR-STAGE4 kit. So Lee, give us a rundown on what this install is kind of entail.
So Stage 4 is our full RZR specific system. So we're going to start with the radio. We have 4 speakers going in, a sub enclosure, and 2 amplifiers. So we're going to show you how to disassemble the vehicle, run all of the wires, mount all of the gear, and reassemble the vehicle.
All right, cool. Well, let's go ahead and get started with that.
So before we get started, the first thing I'd like to do is disconnect the battery. Since we're going to be running new wires and disconnecting and reconnecting some of the plugs in the vehicle, it's always a safe thing to start there. So if you have a 2-seat RZR, the battery is going to be located underneath the driver's seat. If you have a 4-seat RZR, the battery is going to be underneath the rear left seat. So these seats are super easy to take out, so let me show you. So to remove the seat, there's a latch on the back side of it. You're going to lift up on that, pull the seat forward, and then lift up. Okay, so using a 13mm wrench, we're going to disconnect the negative battery terminal.
So the next step in the process is to actually start the disassembly of the dash. First step of that process is to remove the hood. Simply lift up, rotate the catches, and lift it off.
So next we're going to take these 2 screws off here. This is going to hold this top dash piece on the vehicle. Now that we've removed the screws, we're just going to simply pop this panel out of place. And then we're going to have access to these plugs on the back side that we're going to take off. On a couple of them, you may need a small flathead screwdriver to help.
So now that the gauge cluster is removed, the next thing to do is remove the storage pocket. To do this, we need to remove the retaining screw at the back of the pocket.
And this is the same screw that uses a T40 as the other dash piece. And now that that screw is removed, you can simply pull this pocket out of the hole.
All right, so now that we have the pocket out, the next step is to remove the grab bar and the rest of the dash assembly. All right, so to remove the grab bar, simply disengage the retaining pin and remove it, and then we're going to pull the grab bar straight out of the dash. Next, to remove the dash assembly, we need to remove 2 retaining screws using a T40 Torx screwdriver.
So now that these screws are removed, we're going to pop the dash piece out. I'm going to put the steering wheel back down. It just pops out of place.
All right, Lee, now that we've got the dash out, what's the next step?
Well, let's get the rest of these seats out of the way and then we can remove the center console.
Okay.
Okay, now we're going to remove the console. Since this is a 4-seater, it has a front and rear console. To remove these, there's a couple more T40 bolts, and then there's some of these plastic clips, and we'll show you how to take those out. It's actually a 2-piece, so you remove the center pin, and then once the center pin's removed, the rest of it will pop right out. So once all the fasteners are removed, we're going to lift the console out. We're going to need to push these rubber boots through their holes in order to let the console go.
All right, Lee, now that we've pretty much stripped down the entire interior, is there anything else that we need to disassemble?
Well, on this system, we got to make room for the subwoofer. So it's going to take place of the glove box, so that's got to go.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get that out of there and get moving on. All right, Lee, so now that we're done with the disassembly, what's next?
So what I've got here is kind of the main harness. This has power for both the amplifiers as well as the rear speakers. And it's going to run through the middle of the vehicle. Okay. An extra set of hands is nice. This is a turbo model. There's a lot of stuff going on in the console area. So having an extra set of hands on the other side to pass the wires through will really help out. On this one, we're going to start from the inside of the vehicle. We're going to feed the wire towards the front.
Okay. And
then you're going to pull up, and then there's a grommet on the firewall that's large enough for us to remove. We're going to trim it out, and that'll make room for our wires to go back inside the vehicle.
Okay, well, let's get started.
So we run our main wires here through the middle of the vehicle. We need to understand that there's some moving parts down here. The drive shaft of the vehicle's here, and there's a lot, it's exposed to a lot of bad things. So I've ran it underneath here because it was easy to route the wires that way, but we need to make sure that when we're done, the wire's not under this, it's on top of this. So that way it keeps it completely away from any moving parts. So to secure the power wire around the shifter area, we've supplied a cable clamp. And to install this, you'll simply remove this bolt, feed this around the wire, reinstall the bolt holding the cable clamp in place. In the kit, we've included these wire ties that have a Christmas tree on the end. So those are going to push into the holes that are already in the vehicle, and it's going to keep the wire secure away from any moving parts. Our wiring harness includes rear speakers, and we're going to go ahead and run them to the back. So we have a couple connections to make under the hood. Our radio is going to get its power and ground from this terminal block that's located on the firewall. Also, the turn-on lead that comes from the radio is going to plug into the turn-on leads that's going to the amplifiers. That's going to have the radio tell the amplifiers to turn on. Okay, so I want to explain this terminal block under the hood. There's 3 posts, and they're labeled accessory, ground, and battery. Now you have to be aware that these terminals aren't anything unless they have a wire going to them. So on this one, the accessory one does have an accessory wire going to it, so we can use that to power the radio. The one labeled ground does not have a wire going to it, therefore we cannot put our ground wire there because it won't actually get ground. But the screw right next to that it holds the battery terminal in place is an actual ground, and we can use that to power our radio.
All right, now that we got the harness in, what stage are we at?
So we're getting ready to put the enclosure in. There's a bracket here that holds the factory pocket in place. We've actually built it into the enclosure to hold the pocket. So we're going to move this bracket. After that, we're going to go load our subwoofer inside the enclosure, and then we're ready to put it in the vehicle.
Okay, well, let's get the bracket out. All right, guys, at this point, we're ready to go in and actually assemble the subwoofer enclosure. So, Lee, what have we got here?
So this is a subwoofer that's going to go into the dash area. It's going to replace the glove box on the RZR.
Okay.
So before we go out there, we're going to wire up the speaker. This is a dual voice coil speaker, so we're going to show you how to do that. And then one thing to note is this enclosure was built to work with a variety of our woofers, so it's got several different mounting holes. So it's important to locate the ones that match up with this woofer. Also included is this ring. Now this is only for our M2 woofer. So we include an M1 woofer in this kit, so this is not going to be needed for this installation.
Okay, all right, so what's the first step in wiring up the subwoofer?
Yep, so we're going to show you how to hook up the doughboys coil speaker. So easy way to explain this is we're going to start with the wire that we give you in the box. And we're just going to hook one end of it up to one side of the speaker. So the silver wire, which is positive, is going to go to the red terminal. And then the black wire is going to go to the black terminal. Now when we connect to the other side of the speaker, we're going to tie these wires together with the wires that are in the enclosure. So we're going to tie the two silver wires together. And again, those are going to go to the red speaker terminal, which is positive. And then we're going to tie the two black wires together. And that's going to go into the remaining black terminal or negative terminal. Now we can mount our woofer. Okay, so I got my holes lined up. We're going to start by just attaching these four. So basically the left and the right and the up and down position screws. The other four screws are going to go through the grille. So we're going to tighten these four down. Then we're going to install the grille and then we'll do the other four screws. And now that those four are in, position our grille. We can put the other four screws in.
All right, Lee, so now that we've got the woofer installed, what's the next thing we need to do?
Well, before we take it back to the vehicle, it's easier just to go ahead and connect this amp wire to the enclosure. That way we just don't have to do it once we're in the vehicle. So we're just going to use a couple butt connectors. And again, the red wire is positive, the silver wire is positive, so we're going to connect those to each other. So our sub enclosure is designed so that it will hold the stock glove box door. So you're going to remove this from the stock glove box and then it's going to reinstall into our enclosure. So the newer style latch is this style here. You can see the knob holds this, holds the compartment door really well in place. So the bracket we ship the enclosure with is compatible with that. Now some of the older units have this style latch. So what you need to do if you have this style glove box door is you need to remove this piece from the stock glove box. And then we supply a set of nuts and bolts that allow you to attach it to this bracket, and then it's still compatible with your door.
All right, so now that we've got the sub enclosure prep, Lee, what's the next thing we needed to get this thing in?
So we've got our brackets that are going to hold the sub enclosure in place.
Okay.
So we're going to set those in place in the vehicle. We're going to tighten a couple of them up, so we'll show you which ones go where, and then we'll bring the sub enclosure in.
All right, well, let's get them installed so we can get this sub in.
So the first mounting bracket will go at the same points that we removed the glove box from. So in the kit you'll find two bolts that are slightly shorter than the stock bolts. You're going to want to use those as opposed to the stock ones so that it doesn't interfere with the sub enclosure. Now our next bracket is going to be held in place by these two bolts that are in the steering column. That's also going to hold the amp rack in place. So right now we're just going to get these nice and loose so that we can set the brackets in place. Okay, so I backed these off just enough to allow for not only this bracket but the amp bracket. So you can see there's a little more than a 1/4 inch gap. That'll allow us to set this in place, and then now we're going to go prep our amp bracket. So prepping the amp rack is just simply installing these foam pads on this tab here and another one on this tab here, and that's just to prevent any kind of vibration. So the final sub enclosure bracket is going to slide underneath this tab of the amp bracket. You're going to use the stock bolt that held the factory bracket. So at this point we do not want to tighten the steering column bolts yet. We want this bracket to have some movement in it until we get the enclosure position where it needs to go, and then we can go back and tighten those. So one of the tricks I've learned is to put this seat back in the vehicle prior to putting the sub enclosure in. I can sit in this seat while holding the enclosure. It makes it way easier. Thanks, Rico. Okay, so the sub enclosure is going to slide underneath the main frame that goes across. And again, sitting here helps a lot because you can use your knee to support the enclosure as you're guiding it in place. Okay, so this is an important step. The order on which you tighten these bolts is going to make a big difference on how everything is aligned and how easy the install is. So what you want to make sure you do is you want to tighten the 2 bolts that are on this bracket, the 1 bolt that's on this bracket. You want to get those nice and tight. What that's going to do, that's going to get the enclosure aligned exactly where it needs to be in the dash. Once that's done, then we can tighten these down and tighten the steering column bolts down, and then everything's aligned perfectly. So now that we have the enclosure mounted in the vehicle, we can put the factory glove box door on the enclosure.
All right, now that the amplifier plate is installed in the vehicle, but before we install the amps to it, we want to go ahead and do the setup of the amplifiers here on the bench. This is because the controls are not accessible once they're installed, and it's a lot easier to get everything set exactly where you want it before you actually put them in. To set up the 300X4 amplifier, first thing that you want to do is position the 2-channel 4-channel switch to the 2-channel position. This sets up the amplifier to receive the front RCA inputs from the PMX2 amplifier. The next thing we want to do is set the crossovers for both the front and rear output channels. To do this, slide the crossover switch to the right into the HP position as indicated by the markings here. Lastly, we want to adjust the gain controls for both the front and rear channels. To do this, insert the screwdriver and rotate the gain controls until the marking knob located on the control is positioned with the dot between the 7 and the 11. Repeat this for the rear gain control as well. Once that's done, we're ready to move on to the 300X1 amplifier for the subwoofer. First thing you want to do is set up the crossover switch. This needs to be in the low pass position, so the button of the switch needs to be extended. Next, we're going to adjust the gain control, and this is done by aligning the alignment dot with the 7, as you can see here. And finally, we need to adjust the crossover frequency to approximately 80 Hertz. Again, rotate the indicator dot around until it's approximately in line with the Z in the Hertz. This will be approximately 80 Hertz. With that done, we're ready to go ahead and put them in the vehicle.
Yeah, so one of the nice things about our kits is, since we've made all the terminations on all the wires already, this is just a matter of locating the screw holes on the plate, screwing them down, and plugging the wires in.
So the kit comes with 3 sets of RCA connections, but for this particular installation, the PMX2 radio will only use 2 of these cables, the front and the sub. The rear you can save if you ever decide to change anything up later on.
So right now I'm plugging in the RCA connectors into the amplifiers. The one marked subwoofer is going to plug into the input of the 301, and the one labeled front is going to plug into the front input of the 304. Okay, so to get the front speaker wires to the front pods, we're going to run them down these frame tubes. To protect the wire from the metal of the frame tubes, we've included these grommets. So just snap the one in on the top side.
Okay, in.
Then we're going to feed the wire through the tube. And then once it's on the tube, you're going to take this other grommet and snap it into the other end of the tube.
Okay. All right, so now that we've got the speaker wire in, we're ready to prep the pods and get those installed. All right, so now we're ready to prep the speaker pod install. So Lee, what do we need to do to get these things ready?
Well, what I found makes the install of the speaker a lot easier is just before we go into the vehicle, to get a 9/64 drill bit and drill out just the holes you're going to use for the speaker that you're mounting. So in our kit we have the M1 speaker. So you'd want to put that in place, line it up for the 4 holes that go with that speaker, and then you would use the drill bit to go all the way through. And that's going to make it a lot easier for you to hand tighten the screw in place.
All right, so that preps the pods for our M1 speakers that come with the kit, but obviously the additional holes that are in the pod are for other model speakers.
Yep, so our M2 speaker has a slightly different bolt pattern, so we went ahead and put those holes in the pod as well, so if someone wants to use those, they're compatible with those.
Okay, all right, well at this point it looks like the pod prep's ready, so we're ready to move back to the vehicle and try and get these guys installed.
That's correct.
All right, cool.
So our pods mount to 3 factory mounting locations. There's these 2 plastic bosses that we have a screw that will go into, and then we use this lower bolt of the frame here. So in order to do so, we're going to remove this bolt, and then we include this standoff that replaces that bolt. Now on the end of the standoff, our 3rd mounting location here is for the pod. So now that our standoff is in place, we're going to feed our wire through the hole on the side of the pod. And then position the pod into place. We're going to be pulling the slack out of the wire as we're positioning the pod. So there's 2 types of screws included in the kit. One of them is a machine screw. That's going to go into the standoff. So now that the machine screw is in place, the other 2 locations use a coarser thread screw that's designed to go into the plastic. And once all 3 screws are started by hand, you can go then with an Allen wrench and tighten them. Now you can use a conventional Allen wrench. Inside here is kind of some weird angles, so I really like to use an Allen wrench that has a ball tip. Then I can get right in there and tighten the bolt up without any problem. So to seal up the hole for the wire, we've included a foam pad. Just apply it over the wire and the hole. Make sure it's stuck on all the edges. Now we're ready to install our speaker into the pod. You're going to plug the terminals onto the back of the speaker. The silver wire is positive, the black wire is negative. And on the speaker, the larger terminal is positive and the smaller terminal is negative. And we're going to position the speaker so that the holes line up and screw it in.
All right, so now that we've got all the connections made, we're ready to go ahead and start reassembly by putting the dash back in. All right, guys, so before we continue with the reassembly process, we want to go ahead and install the rear cans. To do this, we need to do some prep work on them in the shop, so let's go in there, see what we need to do first. All right, so in preparation to put the rear speaker pods into the system, we're going to do a little prep work. So, Lee, what are the steps that we're going to do here?
Yeah, so this is a lot easier to do on the bench as opposed to as you're trying to fumble around with the pod in the vehicle. So we're going to show you how to take these apart, put them back together, and get it prepped so we can put them in the vehicle. So this one, the lower bushing is going to be removed, and then these 2 pieces are going to fit together like this. But it's really important that we feed this wire through here first.
Now that wire comes as part of the...
This is part of the RZR rear kit.
Okay.
And so we've made this intentionally so that you can either drill a hole in the rail, the tubing, and run the wire straight through the tubing, or we've allowed this gap between the two pieces so that no drilling is required. And where these are going to go on the vehicle, it's a really clean install without having to drill. So that's pretty much what my recommendation is.
Okay.
So after you have these held together, if you notice inside here, there are two walls that's going to hold that nut in place. So you just get it started. And use your Allen wrench to tighten it up. Now on the opposite side, we have these safety wires that in the event that the pod comes loose, this cable is going to hold it from actually falling off the vehicle. Okay. So right now we're going to put that in place. And then this is just an extra shield for that cable. And then that screw is going to hold all of that assembly together. And then another on the back side, just like the other side. So now that we've got all that together, putting this on the vehicle is going to be really easy. So the assembled clamp should look like this. So note the safety cable and the wire come out on the same side. And there's just enough of the connector showing so that we can clip it into the pod. Any more, there's not going to be enough room for the wire to go down inside. Any less, you're going to have a very difficult time plugging this into the pod.
Okay, well, looks like we're ready to go back to the car and get these pods installed. All right, so back of the vehicle, after getting the clamps prepped, what we want to do is go ahead and start assembling the clamp on the roll cage itself. Simply installing the two bolts and tightening them up. Now, the clamps themselves can be positioned either so the speaker's on the outside or the inside of the roll cage, entirely up to your own preference.
So just something to keep in mind is we've given you enough wire in here to mount this approximately 2 inches above the shop bracket. So we've got a little bit of room, but that's kind of where I would go.
Okay, let's get it assembled. All right, so now at this point, with the clamp mounted, we want to go ahead and make the electrical connection of the can to the clamp.
And then before we attach the set screw, we want to make sure that the screw goes through the safety cable.
All right, so now that we have the can mounted, we want to go ahead and start routing the wire, making sure that you keep it away from all moving objects, as well as the exhaust. All right, so once you have the wires routed through the rear access panel, you're going to plug them in to the appropriate rear speaker connector of the main harness. Now that we've got the rear speakers connected, we can go ahead and continue the reassembly of the vehicle with the center consoles and seats. We're ready to start assembling the dash kit with the PMX2 radio. So Lee, what's the first step in this process that we need to do?
So we've designed our dash kit to basically replace this door. So we're going to take this door off and put our dash kit right back in its place.
Okay.
So a couple of steps we'll go through. We're going to pull these pins out. And that's taking that door off. Now this fits right back in its place. So we have a couple things we're going to do first though. So there's these knockouts on the back of this pocket. And you could take this out and get by running wires, but what I really like to do is just cut a larger hole. It really makes the install a lot easier. So we're going to take a 2-inch hole saw and we're just going to cut right in the back side of the pocket, and it's going to really make things a lot easier when we're putting the vehicle back together.
All right, so Lee, now that we've got the hole in the pocket's modified, what's the next step we need to go?
So we're going to mount the radio to the kit. We've included the 4 screws and the Allen wrench that holds them in there in the kit.
Okay, so now we've got the head unit attached to the dash kit itself. What other steps are involved in finishing this?
So when we go to put the dash kit back onto the pocket, instead of using these plastic rods that held the door in place, we actually have a screw that's going to go through the dash kit, and then these are retaining clips that go onto the dash kit, so it's actually more of a solid install as opposed to just a snap fit.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, let's move on to the next step.
Let's go put it in the car.
All right. We're ready to go ahead and finish the install by putting the pocket in the radio. Prior to installing the pocket, we want to remove the speed clip off the back of the pocket. Once we slide the pocket into place, the hole will slide over the provided stud in the subwoofer box. Then, using the provided nut, you'll secure the back of the pocket directly to the subwoofer enclosure.
So now we're going to put all the wires going to the radio through the hole that we made in the back of the pocket. Then we're going to plug those connections into the radio. And now we're going to assemble the dash kit to the pocket. So now we're going to install the screws that hold the dash kit in place. And they have to go through several layers of plastic. So a trick I've learned to get them to align properly is to use a long skinny pick. And then you can feed that through the hole and it'll help align the clip, and then the screw will go right in.
All right, so now that we've got the radio installed and connected, the next step is to reconnect the battery, power it up, and make sure everything's working right.
So for the power, we're going to make a slit right here in the boot, and that's going to allow our wire to fit inside. And what we're going to do on both sides is we're going to remove this nut completely, put our ring terminal over, and then reinstall the nut to hold everything in place.
Once you turn the vehicle on and power the unit up, you want to go through the menu settings to make sure that the PMX2 is set up properly. Do this by pressing and holding the menu button. Rotate the knob and select the audio section. Rotate down and ensure that the rear RCA is set to subwoofer. And then in the internal amplifier setting, we want to go ahead and turn that off since we're using the RCA outputs and not the powered outputs of the radio. This will help reduce the heat output of the radio as well as reduce the load on your RZR. After that's done, we can make the audio adjustments if we choose. We recommend turning the punch EQ up to approximately 3, no higher. This will induce too much bass output, and of course we don't want to distort the sub. After that, you can select and adjust the sub output as high as 20 if you choose, or to where it's to your liking. All right, guys, that pretty much wraps up this install. So Lee, thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to be able to help us out with this one.
Absolutely. So we put a lot of effort into these systems, so hopefully between our efforts and this video, you should find your install very simple.
All right, guys, and always remember, you can always check out rockfordfosgate.com for more information, or if you need additional assistance, contact our customer service line. They're always there, happy to help you out. So it pretty much wraps this up, so thanks again.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, we'll see you again in another video.